The Bronx, 1940s. Before the punchlines, before the profanity, before the profit, there was a boy. Small, wiry, sharp-eyed, growing up on the jagged streets of Morningside Heights in Manhattan. His name was George Carlin, and he was already listening to words, to tone, to authority, and how to tear it all apart. This isn't the story of a comedian. It's the story of a cultural seismograph, a boy born into tension, raised by contradiction, and destined to speak truths we were too afraid to say out loud. Irish Catholic, lower middle class. George Dennis Patrick Carlin was born on May 12, 1937, into a classic Irish-American household, and by classic, we mean loud, emotional, and firmly rooted in Catholic guilt. His mother, Mary Carlin, was fiercely independent, devoutly religious, and in many ways, the only parent George ever really had. His father, Patrick Carlin Sr., was a national advertising manager for The Sun, a man of words and whiskey. But alcoholism shattered the family when George was just 2 years old. His father vanished from the home, and Mary never let him back in. She raised George and his brother on her own. The absence of his father became more than just a hole in his life. It became a seed of defiance, a sense that authority, especially male authority, was something to be challenged, not trusted. God, guilt, and the immaculate deception. Mary enrolled George in Catholic school because that's what you did in those days. Uniforms, rosary beads, Latin prayers. But George didn't fall in line. He fell in love with language, the cadence of a priest's sermon, the terrifying poetry of sin and salvation, the endless contradictions of a system that promised love but traded in fear. This is where his cynicism was born, not from rebellion, but from observation. The first sacred cow he ever slaughtered was religion, and it happened while he was still in short pants. Expelled. Again. Carlin wasn't just a smart-ass. He was a sharp mind trapped in dull institutions. School after school rejected him. He didn't respect rules for the sake of rules. He saw how the system crushed creativity, and he couldn't pretend otherwise. By 15, he'd been kicked out of multiple schools. One teacher said, "George doesn't challenge the material, he mocks it." That was the point. He wasn't trying to pass the test. He was already writing the answers no one had the courage to put down. The voice in the static, but it wasn't just rebellion, it was rhythm. Carlin had a musical ear, not for instruments, but for timing, for inflection. He'd record radio shows, mimic voices, create characters. Radio was his first classroom. Every sound bite was a sermon. Every DJ, a preacher. And every commercial, a lie waiting to be exposed. At 18, he joined the US Air Force, not out of patriotism, but for a shot at the Armed Forces radio. He got what he wanted, and then promptly got himself court-martialed, multiple times. Still, it was in the military that Carlin honed his sound, learning the dials, the cuts, the transitions. While others followed orders, Carlin was listening and building. The birth of a voice. In Shreveport, Louisiana, Carlin finally landed a job as a disc jockey. His voice was velvet, his humour dry, his instincts unteachable. He brought characters to life, infused music with personality, and gave the radio something it hadn't heard before, attitude. But Carlin didn't just want to spin records. He wanted to speak truth. And by now, the voice in his head had grown louder than any broadcast. Early influences. He worshipped Lenny Bruce, not just for the profanity, but for the philosophy. Bruce wasn't just telling jokes. He was dissecting America's soul with a scalpel of sarcasm. Carlin took notes and took heart. The blueprint was clear. Humour could be a weapon. Language could be a revolution. You just had to be brave enough to stand on stage with nothing but a mic and your mind. Closing the first chapter. As the 50s bled into the 60s, Carlin stood at the threshold of two worlds, one that demanded conformity and control, and one that craved authenticity and truth. He would soon become the unlikely prophet of a generation that didn't yet know it was lost. He wasn't ready yet. But the world was getting restless, and George Carlin was about to give it something to believe in, by believing in absolutely nothing.